With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right, even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for being with us here right on Tactics on News Radio 1440. Man, I feel like I'm almost out of practice. I've gotten so out of practice that I can't even do my intro properly, but thank you so much for being here on the program, whether you're viewing us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Periscope, whether you're listening to us on the regular radio on 1440 AM. We thank you so much for being with us and making us a part of your day. It's something that we appreciate you sharing that time with us, and we appreciate you choosing tactics where speech isn't violence, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hate. As always, I'm your host, Caleb Colquitt, and quite a lot has actually transpired in the time that we have not been together, that I've not been able to put on this program for you. Before I get into some of the bigger news, I did want to very briefly talk about the fires that happened, I believe, in Scottsboro, Alabama, where there were people that actually perished. There were several that were injured. I know that they said a lot of people were rushed to the hospital, and a lot of those injuries had to do with the fire, but they actually were more with the fire forcing them into the water, where then they contracted hypothermia because, of course, it is winter up on the lake, just like everywhere else in Alabama, and because of that, there were actually complications that weren't even burn-related, and so we certainly do ask that you pray for everybody that was involved in those fires, the families that were affected by it. I know that that's something that they would greatly appreciate. So today, I did want to go over something that happened and has been happening now for 47 years, but there was sort of a local angle on it with everything that happened on Saturday and Friday with the March for Life. And the March for Life is the biggest annual protest march on Washington, D.C. Now, I want you to really think about that, because as a general rule, the right is just not as good at protesting things. We're not. We have jobs. I know that's a big part of it. I'm kidding. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that, you know, people on the right, because they tend to be a little bit older, they tend to have family commitments demographically, it's harder for them to get out into protest. And so because of that, the left, who a large portion of their base, and this isn't stereotyping, this is just the way that it is, a lot of their base tends to be younger. They tend to have people that aren't married. That's a larger demographic within the left, and so they tend to be better at protesting. And yet the largest protest is the March for Life, and I think a lot of that has to do with, the fact that despite the demographics being what they are that I just stated, younger people as a general rule tend to be a little bit more further to the left, and then even change a little bit and age some and get more conservative as they grow older. But that's not even really what's going on here. I think that when you look at the demographics of the March for Life, my generation happens to be the most pro-life generation since the 60s. And so youth does play a part in that. That is something that, you know, it plays a role in how all this plays out. But even more importantly, I think it speaks to the importance of this issue, because if you're on the right and you have to look at all the different priorities you may have politically, if you're somebody that's super involved in politics and you think, okay, I can only do maybe 1 or 2 protest trips a year, we got to do the one that's the March for Life. And so I think that speaks to how important an issue this is, and it should be, and we'll talk about that a little bit as the day goes on. But one of our own representatives, Mike Rogers, from District 3 of the state of Alabama, which means that there are people here in Montgomery that live in his district and are representative of him. Now, I happen to not be one of them because my address is in Elmore County. I actually happen to be a part of District 2, and so there's also parts of Montgomery that are District 2 as well. So Martha Roby is actually my representative, but Mike Rogers, he weighs in on Trump's appearance for the March for Life, and this was a historic event. Out of the 47-year history of the March for Life, President Trump is the only president that has actually shown up while he is in office and spoken at the March for Life. Regardless of whether you agree with the issue or not, regardless of what you think of Donald Trump, that is a significant historical event. And so Mike Rogers reflected some of this in his public statement that he issued directly after this. Representative Rogers said, "I am especially proud President Trump will address the March for Life, or will address the march and be the first sitting president to do so. President Trump is the most pro-life president to ever sit in the White House. Last year, 58 pro-life laws were passed across the nation. It just shows how important and precious the lives of these unborn babies are to so many. Momentum is on our side. We must keep fighting." Now, if you have been paying attention to this program or my career for any length of time, you know that I'm not the world's biggest Mike Rogers fan. I think that he's better than Martha Roby, but not by much. But on the issue of life, Mike Rogers is a reliable vote. In fact, the National Right to Life has given him a 100% rating. Every time the issue of life comes up, he falls on the correct side of that, at least so far as I've seen from his voting record. But because he issued this statement, and because Mike Rogers is somebody that, like I said, despite my misgivings about him, is very good on the issue of life, I wanted to really dig into this because it's such a profound statement. Remember that when candidate Trump announced that he was going to be running as a Republican, he was, at every single point in his life up until he announced he was running, pro-choice. He's somebody that was pro-choice his entire career. There's even an interview back in the 80s, or maybe it was the 90s, but I actually feel like it goes all the way back. I want to say it was in 1989. Anyway, long time ago, where Donald Trump was talking about how he actually is pro even partial birth abortion. So hardly somebody that has been a long-standing proponent of life. So can we really look at President Trump and say definitively he is the most pro-life president ever? Because if that is the case, then he has made a remarkable heel turn on this particular issue in his life, going from partial birth abortion to being somebody that supports outlawing abortion entirely. I mean, that's as drastic a change as going from a full-on Klan member to somebody like Frederick Douglass or Martin Luther King. That's how drastic a turn that is. And so if that is the case, I really want to dig in, and I want to offer some evidence on both sides here, and I want us to really dig into this question: is President Trump truly the most pro-life president there has ever been? You know, when it comes to these debates, I typically will try to go back and forth and present both sides of it, but I think it would be more expedient and probably more impactful to just let President Trump speak for himself, because of course he did speak at the March for Life, and he kind of took that as an opportunity to lay out all of his accomplishments on this one particular issue. So I'm going to go ahead and let the president defend his pro-life record on his own. Here he is.
It is my profound honor to be the first president in history to attend the March for Life. We're here for a very simple reason: to defend the right of every child, born and unborn, to fulfill their God-given potential. For 47 years, Americans of all backgrounds have traveled from across the country to stand for life. And today, as President of the United States, I am truly proud to stand with you. All of us here today understand an eternal truth: every child is a precious and sacred gift from God. Together, we must protect, cherish, and defend the dignity and the sanctity of every human life. When we see the image of a baby in the womb, we glimpse the majesty of God's creation. And during my first week in office, I reinstated and expanded the Mexico City policy, and we issued a landmark pro-life rule to govern the use of Title X taxpayer funding. I notified Congress that I would veto any legislation that weakens pro-life policies or that encourages the destruction of human life. At the United Nations, I made clear that global bureaucrats have no business attacking the sovereignty of nations that protect innocent life. Unborn children have never had a stronger defender in the White House. And as the Bible tells us, each person is wonderfully made. We have taken decisive action to protect the religious liberty, and we're taking care of doctors, nurses, teachers, and groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor. We are preserving faith-based adoption, and to uphold our founding documents, we have confirmed 187 federal judges who apply the Constitution as written, including 2 phenomenal Supreme Court justices, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. We are protecting pro-life students' right to free speech on college campuses. And if universities want federal taxpayer dollars, then they must uphold your First Amendment right to speak your mind. And if they don't, they pay a very big financial penalty, which they will not be willing to pay. Senate Democrats even blocked legislation that would give medical care to babies who survive attempted abortions. And that's why I've called on Congress, 2 of our great senators here, so many of our congressmen here, and called upon them to defend the dignity of life and to pass legislation prohibiting late-term abortion of children who can feel pain in their mother's womb. Today, millions of extraordinary women across America are using the power of their votes to fight for the right and all of their rights as given in the Declaration of Independence. It's the right to life. And to all of the moms here today, we celebrate you and we declare that mothers are heroes. Your strength, devotion, and drive is what powers our nation. And because of you, our country has been blessed with amazing souls who have changed the course of human history. Every life brings love into this world. Every child brings joy to a family. Every person is worth protecting. And above all, we know that every human soul is divine and every human life, born and unborn, is made in the holy image of Almighty God.
Now, if you're looking at that, that is basically President Trump giving some ideology, but mostly just a laundry list of things that the president has done when it comes to the issue of life. And looking back at that, and I tried to be as objective as possible because, you know, President Trump isn't my favorite president of the past few years, and I have my misgivings about him. But you look at that, and then you look at what other presidents in my lifetime and slightly before, the modern era as it were, have done for the issue of life, because this is, you know, since Roe v. Wade, that's only been 47 years. So if you're looking at that time period, and you're looking at all of the presidents in that time period, I think Representative Rogers has a solid case. Because you went down the list of the different things he's done with the cutting funding to Planned Parenthood, at least as much as he was able to cut through the executive without the permission of Congress. You have him trying to enforce the rule that you're not going to be giving money to organizations that do abortions, at least from the federal level. He's tried to do that through the Justice Department. You had, like he was talking about, the Mexico City policy that was originally enacted by George W. Bush and then got canned and now was reinstated by President Trump. You talk about the 2 justices. Now, that one's a bit of a stretch And the reason I say that is not because I have serious questions or could point to something specifically in Brett Kavanaugh or Justice Gorsuch's past and talk about how they're not really pro-life or that they may not overturn Roe v. Wade, because the thing is, at this point, that is speculation. Now, I definitely feel a lot better with Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Gorsuch on the bench than I would Obama appointees. But my point is, it seems as though it's a step in the right direction, but it's hard for me to definitively say, yes, that was something that was very good for the issue of life, just because we haven't seen the fruit of that. But where we have seen the fruit of that is in his federal judge appointments. And that's one of the things that he just mentioned. The federal judges have made it much better for not only the right to life itself, but also the religious liberty of those who practice that. For example, he cited the Little Sisters of the Poor with the Plan B bill. With the Plan B pill, and not providing that through Obamacare, which would have necessitated that they do give out essentially abortion drugs to do something that the Catholics and other religions don't agree with. That would be something that the vast majority of Christianity wouldn't agree with, Plan B pills. Catholics are a little bit more restrictive in that they don't like any kind of birth control, but, not going to get into a theological discussion. The point is, you're looking at all that. If I were looking at that list, and I'm looking at the list of George Herbert Walker Bush, George W. Bush, and of course Obama, Clinton, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Nixon, looking at even Reagan, looking at all of that, if I look at the list and I take the names away, try to take away as much of my preconceived notions going into it, and I look at that list compared to the list of other presidents in the past, I think Representative Rogers is right. Objectively speaking, as far as I can tell, and if somebody wants to point to some other things that were presented by other presidents that maybe I missed, by all means, put it out there. But by my calculation, so far as I can tell, Representative Rogers is right. President Trump is, at least on paper, the most pro-life president that this nation has ever had. And the fact that he is the first president to speak while in office at the March of Life is sort of a testament to that. Now, here's the inverse of this. I don't know how much of it is ideologically because it's what Trump actually believes, because to this day, we've never gotten a clear story as to why. I've never gotten an answer that made sense to me why President Trump believed that abortion was something that was important to keep legal, even going up to third trimester abortions, partial birth abortions, which the vast overwhelming majority of even Democrats don't agree with. I never understood why and how he went from that to being the most pro-life president, at least in the history of this country, so going so far back as Roe v. Wade. How did that happen? Why did that happen? See, I've still not gotten a good answer for that, and because of that, I think ideologically, this may just be an issue that Trump doesn't see as all that important. I'm really not sure. I know that his daughter has been pro-choice for a very long time and has been an advocate of that. She's been very pro-abortion, and she just hasn't said a whole lot since her father took office, and I'm not sure exactly why that is. But I tend to think that ideologically he's probably not, and because of that I do get the sense that this is mostly a political ploy because he knows this is a very, very, very important issue to his constituents. In fact, to the vast majority of conservatives in this country, it is the issue. But looking at what President Trump is saying, I do get the feeling, and this is a gut feeling, that ideologically the core is not really there, and he's doing this more because he feels like he needs to. I don't think that he really feels strongly in favor of abortion either, to be perfectly honest. I think that he doesn't see it as a very important issue, unfortunately. But he's saying all the right things. And if you're looking at the results, he's actually far more effective at protecting the lives of the unborn than any of the previous presidents that I mentioned that may have ideologically been there. And this, I think, may be the single biggest part of it. I think this may be the biggest part of why he's the most pro-life president since Roe v. Wade. I really think it boils down to what he said at the very beginning of the speech, which is that he is proud to have the pro-life crowd there. He is proud to be the first president to speak at the March for Life. You see, you got the feeling that with the other Republican presidents, they were willing to pay homage to the pro-life march, and even if you got the feeling like with George W. Bush, that he probably agreed with the pro-life argument, they still felt that it was politically unpalatable, and it's an issue that, because it is such an important issue to people on both sides and because it is very divisive, the truth is they didn't really want to dive too deep into it because they're afraid it might hurt their poll numbers and might hurt their chances at re-election. So what they would normally do is they would try to just kind of ignore the pro-lifers most of the time and maybe subtly give a wink and a nod every once in a while and talk about how the issue is important to them whenever it came close to election time because they knew they had to shore up that base. But they kind of ignored it most of the time, and the Republicans typically got the pro-life vote by virtue of not being Democrats. So in other words, they didn't get that vote because they were very pro-life. They typically tended to get that vote because they weren't pro-choice. And there is a difference. It was not an issue that they were passionate about. It's not one that they were willing to fall on their sword for. It's not one that they were willing to charge in and make a difference. It was something that they felt that they had to say because they knew what an important issue it was to so many of their constituents, but they typically wound up winning that battle just because the other guys were a lot worse than them, not because they were good at it. And with President Trump, at a certain point you have to say, look, I get that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and believe me, I would have been, especially in the campaign, the last person that would be expecting to say that President Trump is the most pro-life candidate, the most pro-life president we've ever had, but I don't think you can make an argument against that with looking at everything that he's done. And ultimately, him having the guts to come out and say to the pro-life crowd, I'm proud to be your president. I'm proud to fight for you. I am proud to be standing with you today. I don't think you would have gotten that out of George W. Bush or George Herbert Walker Bush or even President Reagan. I just don't. I think that they would have been too worried about the politics of it. That's one of the things that people love about President Trump the most. He just does things, sometimes good, sometimes bad, but he just goes out and does things and does not care what the ramifications are. Now, sometimes that leads him into dangerous waters. But there are times like this that I think it does shore up his base and let them know that he is somebody that isn't ashamed of them, that he wants them on his side, and he wants to be the one fighting for them. That makes a difference in the mind of voters. And you can tell by the way that they support him. I think that, sometimes that gets a little out of hand, but I'm just saying that if you're looking at this, that's the reason. Ultimately, that's the reason. Now, overall, the speech is pretty good. I do get the feeling that it was largely a campaign speech. I do get the feeling, based on the context, based on the way that President Trump is presenting himself, the reason that he did this is because he wanted to go out there and shore up his base, and all the people like me who had legitimate concerns about how he would actually be pro-life in office, to try to lay those concerns to rest and to get that crowd up and ready for going, because now he'll always be able to say in any future election that he may engage in, which I don't assume that there would be any, but he will always be able to say, I was the first president that had the courage to actually stand up at the March for Life. I was the first one that actually wanted the pro-life crowd on my side and wanted them to know that I support them and I was not ashamed of them. That makes a huge difference. I don't know that it makes a difference much when it comes to moving the needle. I don't think that there was anybody that was pro-choice that saw this speech on C-SPAN or something going, oh my gosh, I'm pro-life now. Like that, it wasn't an ideological speech. It was a campaign speech. It was Trump saying, this is why you should vote for me. If you care about the issue of life, you'll vote for me and not for whoever the Democrats are putting up. And so in that sense, it left me... In that sense, I was a little dissatisfied with it, and I wish that it had been something else. But the core of it, I think, comes at the beginning, where President Trump wants to make this connection to the voter that you and I are on the same side, and I want to be the guy next to you in the foxhole when you're charging in and fighting for life. That does make a huge difference in the mind of voters, and it does shore up the base. Now, the one really unfortunate thing from this, because as I've discussed many times on this program, President Trump has a superpower. His superpower is that he can draw a foul, just like in basketball. You know how there are some players that are just excellent at drawing a foul. And you hope that that guy is also a really good free throw shooter. But some guys, they just excel at that. Whether it's because they're big or whatever it is, they're just super good at getting other players to foul them and send them to the free throw line. That is what President Trump does best, better than anybody I have ever seen. What he does is he comes out and he says stuff, and even if it happens to be kind of stupid or it wasn't the politically smart thing to do, what normally happens, because they loathe the man, the left will come out and react to it, and their reaction will be so over the top and it will so overplay their hand that the average voter, especially a swing voter, is looking at it like, okay, I don't necessarily agree with what Trump just said, but I certainly don't want to be on the same side as that crazy person over there. This happened countless times with Hillary Clinton in the campaign. It happened countless times with the squad over the years. This is the thing that Trump does best. He makes the left make themselves look crazy. And I really thought that this speech was going to do exactly that. It largely didn't. It flew largely under the radar, and part of that may have been because of the shadow of impeachment and a lot of other news stories going on. I think that had something to do with it. I think the fact that the media just frankly didn't want to cover the March for Life, as they never do, had a lot to do with it. The media had no desire, no appetite for covering the largest March for Life ever, considering it's already, even before the huge crowd showed up, it was already the biggest annual march on Washington, D.C. They didn't want to be airing President Trump's rhetoric that is for getting rid of abortion. They didn't want him shoring up the base even more, and because of that, I think the media, whether they all did it collectively, which I don't believe, I think they just kind of, on their own, decided that this was a story they had no appetite for. It didn't draw the foul, which is really surprising. I thought that there were going to be a lot of people on the left and a lot of media types that went out there and tried to bash the president for making this speech and was going to make themselves look silly and foolish and radical. And that largely didn't happen. But the media did make a little flub, and I'll go into that in just a second. But what ultimately this speech should have been is routine. And this is not Trump's fault. Trump should not be the first president to speak at the March for Life. At the very least, at the bare minimum, he should have been fourth. It should have been him, Reagan, Herbert Walker Bush, and George W. Bush at the minimum. And yet that did not take place. But the great thing about this is it breaks down the status quo, which is good. And what I'm hoping this does is it sets a new bar and it puts Congress on watch. That's what I'm ultimately hoping for. I'm hoping that congressional leaders, because they are looking at this issue and looking at the different issues that voters care about, they are looking at this and saying, you know, this guy is pretty popular, and a lot of people are willing to go to the mat for him and call him the most pro-life president ever because he actually wants to do things and get things done. Maybe it would be smart for us to try to make the needle move at this point, because you have to remember as well, at one point in President Trump's presidency, at the very beginning, for the first 2 years, we had the White House, we had the Senate, we had the House, and we had at least a somewhat, I wouldn't say majority, but a court that was at least, you didn't know for sure that they absolutely were going to cut against the grain and absolutely try to just reaffirm abortion in every scenario. And so you would think if there were any opportune time to go after what many politicians on the right call the most important issue, which it is, the issue of life, you would think if there were ever an opportune time to do that, it would have been in this period. And what did they do? Literally nothing. Congress has done nothing in President Trump's tenure. Now, there have been people that have proposed things, but they've all been voted down and struck down, and even a Republican-controlled government having the trifecta still couldn't do anything to actually affect some kind of change. I mean, for goodness sake, it would be one thing if they had passed the heartbeat bill or the third trimester bill that they were doing where I think it was post 25 weeks. I mean, that would have put us, we are now, because we were like this beforehand, but on the federal level, we are one of only 6 countries that does not ban abortion after 25 weeks, and Congress couldn't even get that through. They couldn't even get through a bill to protect children that were already born. This is how radical the right, I mean, it's in the Republicans and the Democrats at this point. And they could not get $500 million to stop flowing into Planned Parenthood. They controlled the House. The House sets the budget. And they couldn't even do that. I mean, they didn't cut the budget at all. But you can't even cut the money going directly to Planned Parenthood, which then turns around and uses that same money to campaign against Republicans. You would think if nothing else other than selfish interest, they would have tried to pull the plug on that one, but no. And I'm hoping if this does anything, because like I said, I don't think this is going to change anybody's mind about whether or not they support abortion or not. What I am hoping happens here is that the Republicans will look at this and say, President Trump became wildly popular on this by basically just throwing people a bone. And I mean, the amount of spending he wound up cutting was only like, 4% of Planned Parenthood's total money that they get from the federal government. So it wasn't exactly a huge cut. And he got wildly popular and got praised for it. Maybe Congress should look at, I don't know, pulling it from the most effective genocidal organization in American history. And yes, I'm including the neo-Nazis and the Klan in that. I mean, just by sheer numbers, Planned Parenthood is worse than them. And they couldn't even do that. Because the vast majority of Republicans in Congress don't care about this issue. And as sad as it is to say, that's the truth. So the media did make a small flub on this. They did actually cause a little bit of a stir. It wasn't huge. But you should know that there is a part of this speech that the media did try to give some backlash on. This was the part that they took issue with.
Nearly every top Democrat in Congress now supports taxpayer-funded abortion all the way up until the moment of birth. Last year, lawmakers in New York cheered with delight upon the passage of legislation that would allow a baby to be ripped from the mother's womb right up until delivery. Then we had the case of the Democrat governor in the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we love the Commonwealth of Virginia, but what is going on in Virginia? What is going on? The governor stated that he would execute a baby after birth. You remember that?
So that's the part that they found incredibly controversial, and what they tried to do is they tried to act like it didn't happen. There were a couple of, and granted, this is the very far left, this is the extreme, but there were at least two groups that tried to claim that President Trump was lying to people and misleading them over this part of the speech where he was talking about Governor Ralph Northam, saying that he would execute a baby that was already born. This isn't even abortion anymore. At this point, this is straight up infanticide. And they were saying that, oh, well, the left just goes into attack mode, and they're saying, well, he was lying about that. He was mischaracterizing it. Governor Northam never advocated for that. And these are the organizations that were doing that. You can see up there, Mediaite was trying to run with this, Media Matters. So, granted, the far left, this wasn't even the CNNs or your ABCs, but they were perpetuating this, that what Trump was doing, he was telling a lie, trying to fact-check the president, because here's the thing. Even the left wants you to forget that this happened. Even the left wants to pretend as though Governor Northam never said any such thing, but the thing is, we have the internet now, and so things just happen to live forever. Here's Governor Ralph Northam in his own words.
So in this particular example, if a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mothers.
Right, so a discussion will ensue, says Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia, that once the baby's born, and the mother didn't want the baby, but she goes into labor, she has the baby, then the infant will be kept comfortable, and then we'll talk about whether or not we're going to kill the baby or not. The baby's not only not in the mom, it's already in a different room being kept comfortable, which is interesting to me because you would assume that Ralph Northam's logic is the reason we're able to kill this newborn is because it's not yet a person, despite the fact that it's not even in the womb anymore. See, I always thought that the Democrat line was, well, it starts being life when it makes the short journey 8 inches up the birth canal, and then magically it becomes a human. Even though it is exactly the same before as it is after, but we won't get off into that right now. But he's saying even though that baby is already born in a different room, I don't know why you would worry about keeping it comfortable, because I assume that Northam's logic there is that, well, it's not really a person, and that's why we're able to kill it. So I don't know why comfort would factor into it at all. This is the ridiculous, self-contradictory philosophy that the pro-death left worships. This situational morality, where literally just a person deciding that they want to keep you or don't want to keep you is enough to justify whether or not we can kill you or not. And what's going on here is that the left realizes that even though they would agree with Northam on virtually everything in abortion, I'm not going to tack on the infanticide thing because, that is Northam's stance. That's not necessarily Media Matters or Mediaite stance, even though it wouldn't shock me if it was. They want you to forget that that ever happened. Want to pretend that it just wasn't there. And they think that you're dumb enough to fall for that. Look, President Trump is notorious for telling half-truths and straight-up lying. It happens. The guy has a, at best, tentative, tumultuous relationship with the truth. But there wasn't a single false statement in that clip I just showed you. Everything he said accurately characterized exactly the Democrats' position, and specifically Northam's position, which I just showed you in his own words. But the media believes, because they've gotten away with it for so long, that they can just straight up lie to people and pretend as though what President Trump is saying is untrue and that nobody will call them out on it. So this brings me really, and I think that the Northam clip really highlights this, because I get people all the time, and especially people that refer to themselves as pragmatists on the right, they'll ask me, Caleb, why be a single issue voter on this? I have people on the left ask me that too. Why is it that this is an issue that is so make or break for you? And I've said on the air many times, if you are even slightly pro-choice, you cannot get my vote. It is not possible. I will not vote for you if that is the case. And when I say that, I mean even in the most extreme cases, if you are not 100% pro-life, I don't care if I line up with you on literally every other issue, you can't get my vote. And I've had so many people come and ask me about that, and I'm glad that they did. I'm glad that they're curious. Here's why. Because the issue of life is the only issue that matters in regards to every other right. Because ultimately, what I vote on is the one that I believe is, as the Declaration of Independence says, the one that is most likely to secure my liberty and future happiness. That's my curriculum. Those are the parameters I set around my vote. And when it comes to life, if you don't have that issue, literally no other issue matters. Because every single right that every human being has revolves around the right to life. Look through the Bill of Rights. It is impossible to have freedom of speech if you're not alive. Dead people can't talk. It is impossible to freely exercise your religion if you are not alive. Dead people can't go to church or talk about their church or evangelize. It is impossible to keep and bear arms if you are not alive. I mean, you get the idea. I could go on and on and on and go through each of the Bill of Rights. I could go through liberty, the pursuit of happiness, being free from slavery. You could even go to what the founders wouldn't have necessarily considered rights, but we consider rights today, like the right to vote. But you can't do any of those things if you're dead. Well, you can vote if you're dead, if you're a Democrat. That's true. But under normal circumstances, you're not allowed to have any of those rights if you're not alive. Every single right that a person has is contingent upon their right to life. And if you are unwilling to defend that right, then I have to assume that you are unwilling to defend that right and anything else. Because if you don't have a right to life, but you have the right to free speech, for example, well, the second that somebody says something that you don't like, you may not be able to silence their speech, but you can kill them. Okay, well, then you effectively have removed their right to free speech, and you could go on with all of the other rights, so on and so forth. And because of that, if you are not willing to defend the right to life, you are unwilling to defend every single other right. And that's why I am a single issue voter on this. Look, ultimately, and I saw this over the weekend, I think it was Joe Biden that was saying that transgenderism is the civil rights movement of our generation, which is such a load of hogwash. Because I remember, I'm old enough to remember because I'm, more than 6 years old, when gay marriage was the civil rights issue of our generation. And then as soon as it went away, they claimed that they were still being oppressed and they still didn't have all the rights that they needed, and so they were going to have men going into bathrooms and all that other stuff. Look, they can try that all they want. But I am thoroughly convinced that history is going to look back on our society today when they're reading about us in their school books 30, 40, 50 years from now. They're going to say, how did those barbarians allow such an evil paganistic practice to exist? May not use those exact words, because I have a feeling we won't be all that religious in the future, but the point is, even somebody that is a-religious and amoral could look back at that and say, how did they not get that that was killing millions of innocent lives? Abortion is an actual civil rights issue because it deals with a person's actual civil liberties. The most important and foremost among those liberties, the right to live, the right to exist. Without that, it doesn't matter if you have any other rights because they can all be taken away from you. If the government has the right to remove your life from you without your consent, then they can remove any other right from you just by killing you. That's why the right to life is a single issue for me, the single most important one, the only one that I will say to a candidate, if you're not on board with this, I'm sorry, I can't cast my vote for you. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in a minute on tactics.
And now for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible with Pastor Gregory Post.
Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Community Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. And now it's time once again for another reading of the SJW Bible. Today's story is going to be about how Naaman was cured of his leprosy in 2 Kings, chapter 5, verses 8 through 14. And it says, "It happened when Elisha, the man and or woman of God, depending on how he identified at the time, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, and he sent word to the king, saying, 'Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel.' So Naaman came with his horse and his chariots, which were sustainably raised and emitted no greenhouse gases, and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, 'Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean.' Not that I'm implying that you were dirty just because you were a leper. That would be leper shaming. But Naaman was furious and went away, saying, 'Behold, I thought, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand all over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Paphra and the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?' So he turned and went away in rage. Then his servants came near and spoke to him, saying, 'Wow, that Elisha guy is such a xenophobic jerk. Where does he get off implying that the rivers in Israel are better than the rivers in our country? That nationalist jerk probably believes in Israeli exceptionalism too.' So then God spoke to Naaman directly and said, 'Naaman, I am so sorry for being intolerant and not accommodating enough. I should never have asked you to have to go and do something to be cured. You believe in me, and since purification comes from faith only, I'll just go ahead and heal you right here and now.' And from that hour forward, his flesh was cured, and they all went out to try some local craft beer." Wow, so inspirational. Thank you for listening to this reading of the SJW Bible. And remember, the only truth that matters is your truth.
And welcome back, all. Thank you so much for being with us here on Tactics on News Radio 1440. Now, this next one, it is one of those things that didn't at all surprise me. It's more like it confirmed what I already knew. And I think that really the best way to dive into it is really just to show you. This is a clip that happened last night on CNN between Don Lemon and one of his guests in an exchange that was going on. And it really does show the reason. It shows the arrogance and the disdain of the people in the left that live in their ivory towers and assume that everybody that doesn't think the same way that they do, well, they must be a moron. That's really the only explanation that they could give. So here it is.
And obviously it's false. And look, he also knows deep in his heart that Donald Trump couldn't find Ukraine on a map if you had the letter U and a picture of an actual physical crane next to it. He knows that this is, an administration defined by ignorance of the world. And so that's partly him playing to their base and playing to their audience, the credulous boomer Rube demo that backs Donald Trump, that wants to think that Donald Trump's a smart one and y'all elitists are dumb.
You elitists with your geography and your maps and your spelling, even though
your math and your reading.
Yeah, you're reading, your geography, knowing other countries, sipping your latte.
All those lines on the map.
Only them elitists know where Ukraine is. Sorry, I apologize. But by
North or
the
South
way,
Ukraine? Oh my God!
but you know what? But it was Rick's fault. I blame Rick. But in all honesty,
Blame
you know what
Rick.
NPR should
Why
do?
not? Sorry, hold on. Wait.
Can I tell you
give me
what?
a second. Hold on. Sorry. That was good. Sorry, Rick. That was a good one. I needed that.
All right, so a couple of things here. Basically, what this showed, and like I said, I don't even want to use the word revealed, because this is something that if you've watched Don Lemon for more than, I would say, 5 consecutive minutes, and if you have, then God bless you for your sacrifice. I mean, that's... I gotta believe Don Lemon's show is the only one playing in hell, and that's part of the punishment. But ultimately what this goes down to is that there is a seething disdain for anybody that disagrees with them. Now, the first part is not funny, but it's not something that I'm bothered by. Because we all know that they don't like Trump. We all know that they joke about him all the time. That's not an uncommon thing. That's pointed at an actual political figure. Now, should this be something that is airing on the show of somebody that claims to be a journalist, which Don Lemon has done on the air multiple times, that thinks of himself as a objective news person that's just telling you the facts? No, it absolutely shouldn't. But the point is, that's Don Lemon's shtick. He's on CNN and he hates the president. I mean, that's basically his entire resume. So Don Lemon does that, and that part, at the very first jab that he takes about Trump not being able to find Ukraine on a map, and I don't know whether he could or not, but the way that he phrased it just wasn't funny. And when it comes to a joke, I think there are definitely bad jokes that you shouldn't tell, even if they are funny. But if the joke just isn't funny, then regardless of whether or not the content was offensive or not, then the joke doesn't hold water and shouldn't. But when it comes to the rest of it, where he's not attacking Trump, he's attacking people that supported Trump or voted for Trump. The way that he cast every single Trump voter, the way that he cast him is like, well, that plays into the demographic of his base who can't read a map and are incapable of spelling correctly and reading. And then he goes into a stereotypical Southern accent. Now, it's a pretty bad Southern accent, but the point is it's a Southern accent, and that's the thing that he's trying to portray. And, of course, Trump is very popular in the South. And another thing that he says in there is the boomer rubes. In other words, the imbeciles, the neophytes, the little people that live between these metropolises of enlightened people on the coast in New York City and LA. Everybody that lives between that, those country fried morons that are mouth breathers out there that are so stupid that they voted for Trump, those are the people that I'm talking about, the ones that can't read a map and can barely read at all and can't spell. The arrogance just drips off of these people. It is overflowing out of them. They just think that they're so much smarter and so much better than you. If there was ever a "this is why you got Trump" moment, that's it. Not that specific moment, but this attitude that people in the media and on the left have towards anybody that disagrees with them on a policy issue. The only explanation for why you could disagree with them is because you're just a blithering country fried idiot. And that's the reason that you have Trump, and if we could just get rid of you people, if we could just get rid of your voice and make your vote not count, then the country would be a better place. See, the thing is, you're too stupid to make your own decisions, which is why the government needs to take control and make your decisions for you. Really, this is the same attitude that's at the heart of all progressive thinking, that you're not smart enough as an individual to make it on your own, to run your own business, to do the right thing, to protect the planet, to take care of the poor and the needy. See, you're just too dumb to do that, and you won't do it because you're a terrible person on top of that, and because of that, we need to step in and make you do it. We need to make you be charitable with taxes. We need to make you not fat by taking away certain things, taking away the bad options that you're not smart enough to avoid. It all goes back to control. And that is what is epitomizing that. It's not making fun of Southerners, or it's not that this offends me because it takes a jab at people that tend to think like I do. Granted, I'm not a Trump voter myself. I didn't vote for the guy the first time. But that's not it. I mean, look at Jeff Foxworthy, Larry the Cable Guy, Bill Engvall, Jerry Clower. Those guys spend 90% of their routines making fun of Southerners. And who is their biggest audience? Other Southerners. It's not that they're offended by anybody making fun of them or that they can't take a joke. It's that the reason that this guy is doing it is because he hates those people. And so does Don Lemon. He wasn't laughing at the joke because it was funny. He was laughing at it because it gave him an outlet to voice his hatred of the people that disagree with him. That's what it boils down to. Now, you'll hear me often make fun of other candidates specifically, and I'll also make fun of the mannerisms of certain people. Like, I'll make fun of hipsters or something like that. But I don't assume that they're terrible people, and I don't assume that they're idiots. That's the difference. Don Lemon gets on his show every single night to voice his disdain for these people, and this guy gave him an outlet to say it directly. That's why he was enjoying himself so much. It goes back to this mentality that they're just so much smarter and so much better than you. And that's why they need to be able to be empowered to make all of your decisions for you. And when you little people start making decisions that we don't like electing a guy that's not even a politician as president, well, then we have to step in and do something about it. Like, kick the guy out of office for no reason at all. That's the shtick that Adam Schiff is doing right now. We can't let the American people interfere with the election. We can't wait and hold off on this thing and wait for, facts and evidence and all of that other stuff when we've got to get rid of this guy because the American people might vote for him again. That's essentially the long and short of what Adam Schiff has been saying for the past 3 weeks. And these are the same people that think you're such an idiot that you're too stupid to get in out of the rain that also think that men can get pregnant. Yeah, if I have to choose between a Trump voter and a guy that thinks that men can get pregnant and have periods and have babies, and that women can, get prostate cancer and all the other stuff that goes with being a man, yeah, I'm going to assume that the Trump voter, even if he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, is probably going to be smarter than you. Because at that point, you have jettisoned all reason and logic and grabbed hold onto nonsense. The implication that every single Trump voter is a imbecile, ironically, is the reason that they call people like this elitist. Because they just assume that if you disagree with them, the only possible explanation is that you're just too dumb. You're just too dangerous, too stupid. That's what an elitist is. Somebody that assumes that everybody that doesn't think like them is just beneath them. And that's what you saw on full display with Don Lemon. And what's hilarious to me is the people at CNN see things like this and have segments where they cast the entire half of the entire country, because it's become commonplace for them to call every single Trump supporter a racist. That's happened multiple times on CNN. We've done stories about it over and over again. And this is just them also calling them stupid. It's so common for CNN to cast half the country as a bunch of backwards, ignorant, racist hicks that aren't smart enough to read and write their own name, and then they sit there and wonder, I wonder why our ratings are so low. It doesn't make any sense. Maybe your ratings are so low is because you talk about half the country as though they are deplorables. Maybe that's the reason that people aren't wanting to watch CNN. When you alienate half the country right out of the gate before the race even starts, it's kind of hard to get ahead of the other networks. But ultimately, I do think that Don Lemon has done more to ensure that Donald Trump will be reelected than any other person or group of people in the country, with the exception, perhaps, of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her squad. They may be the only ones, I think you could make an argument, have done more to get Trump reelected than anybody else. And will he get reelected? I don't know. But if he does, Don Lemon definitely has played a major part in that, and that clip illustrates perfectly in about a minute and a half why that is. There was finally somebody that was willing to stand up and punch these guys in the mouth for saying that, no, we think half the country is a bunch of evil, stupid racists. For all of his character flaws, which are many, and I have detailed at length on this show, that's the way that you got Trump. Those people were like, somebody needs to listen to me, and somebody needs to put these people in their place, and Trump does. It's one of the best things about him. All right, let's go ahead and go to the Daily Dose of Stupid.
No, you messed it up. You're stupid.
All right, today's Daily Dose of Stupid comes via the Des Moines Register. So the Iowa caucuses are closing in very quickly, and because of that, the local papers there in Iowa are starting to endorse the candidate that they believe. And this happens all the time with newspapers. They'll have their editorial board. They'll put it in their opinion section. They will voice what candidate they believe is the best. So they do this with the Democrat candidates. And here is a quote from the article. The Des Moines Register editorial board endorses Elizabeth Warren as the 2020 Iowa Democrat caucuses, as she is the best leader for our times. All right, so far, I wouldn't want Elizabeth Warren as my candidate, but that's the one that they feel that they want to go with, and frankly, I hope that they're correct, because out of the entire field there, I think that Elizabeth Warren is the one that is by far the easiest to be able to defeat. So this is the interesting part, where they start getting into the rationale of why they say that Elizabeth Warren is the one that should be the candidate. Warren will treat the truth as something that matters. So, out of all of the candidates that are in the field, and even expanding it to not just the ones that are in the field now, but for all of the candidates that were in the field beforehand, when there were 370 Democrat candidates, the one that I trust the least to tell the truth is Elizabeth Warren. Now, there are several others that have a habit of lying. We've done segments on how Cory Booker has lied before. Kamala Harris has been caught in a couple of scandals before where she was caught lying. There are several other candidates that we could go to. Joe Biden's definitely been caught in lies before. But the one that seems to be the most habitual liar out of all of them, the one that seems the least authentic, is without a doubt Elizabeth Warren. I was even watching a video the other night. The New York Times did something where they were playing videos that they had recorded the different candidates talk about who their celebrity crush was. It's a goofy little fluff piece. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a little out of place for a serious journalistic institution like the New York Times to be lobbing softball questions to candidates like this, in my opinion. But, nonetheless, that's what was going on. And they get to Elizabeth Warren, and she goes, The Rock. I mean, he's just eye candy. Now, I don't get it, because I'm a guy, but The Rock was voted sexiest man alive a couple years ago by some magazine or something, so there's a lot of women that have a crush on The Rock. Elizabeth Warren is the only woman I've ever seen that has ever talked about how attractive she finds The Rock that didn't seem convincing. Now, maybe she actually does, but what I'm saying is, out of all of the candidates, she is so polished and so politically trained, and it comes off in every single thing that she does. You just assume, by virtue of watching her speak, that she's being insincere because of her mannerisms and the way that she comes off. And so I'm astounded that the reason that they are saying that Elizabeth Warren should be the candidate is because she treats the truth as something that matters. If that was your criteria, Literally any other candidate would be good. As much as I dislike Bernie Sanders, as much as I think that he's a raving lunatic and a sad old communist who none of his ideas will work, the man's authentic. The man tells the truth. Now, I think that the truth that he's telling is, bat crap crazy, but the thing is, he really does believe in socialism. He believes in the product that he is selling, and he's very open and honest about that kind of thing. Andrew Yang, again, somebody that I think that he's wrong on a lot of things, but man, the guy is authentic. I never get the sense that he's playing me or he's reading from a script or anything like that. And when it comes to Elizabeth Warren's record on telling the truth, it's real bad. And not just little lies or things that she just kind of inadvertently said at some point. A lot of these lies are really big lies that she had time to think about and workshop and repeated over and over again until she finally got caught and had to admit that she was not telling the truth. The first one is actually a recent one. She lied about Bernie telling her that a woman couldn't win the election. Now, how do I know that she's telling a lie on this? To be honest, I don't have hard evidence because you can't prove a negative. You can't prove that something didn't happen. You can't prove that something doesn't exist. You just go with the evidence that you have and say, we have no reason to believe that it actually did happen or that it does exist. And like I said, when you look at the track record that Bernie Sanders has versus the track record that Elizabeth Warren has when telling the truth, I'm going to go with Bernie Sanders because at this point, Elizabeth Warren is the little boy who cried wolf. And it pains me to have to side with Bernie Sanders on literally anything. But, I mean, you look at the two of them, and somehow it happened in a room where it was just Elizabeth and Bernie, and there's no other witnesses and nobody that could corroborate their story, and her story seems to shift a little bit in each telling of it, and we also have video of Bernie, like, back in the 80s saying that he thought a woman could be president. He supported Hillary Clinton in the last election after he lost the primary, so yeah, I'm gonna go with Elizabeth Warren made the whole freaking thing up. I don't hesitate to say that at all. And if somehow, I don't know, a recording of that conversation inadvertently surfaces somehow, and I'm confident that it's not going to, because if Elizabeth Warren had that, she would have already aired it. I can say with complete confidence and absolutely no fear that I will be proven wrong, Warren was making that crap up. She has also lied about her kids attending public schools. There was a woman that came up and said, well, I know that you may not understand the premise of this because I know your kids attend private schools. And she goes, no, my children attend public schools. Well, no, one of her kids attended a public school for like a year, a little less than a year. And then they all attended private schools the entire rest of their childhood. And the way that she worded it, my kids attend public school. Plural. Well, she was lying about at least one of them. So, and she was definitely misrepresenting on the other, because the vast majority of both of her children's lives, the vast majority of their academic career, they've gone to private institutions. She also lied about being unable to attend college and how much she had to pay for it. And it's funny because this lie switches based on what argument she's trying to make at the time. Because she made a video, for example, at one point, saying that, well, college should be more affordable because I only paid $50 when I went to college. She's lying about it there because she also got a massive scholarship, which is good. I mean, good for Elizabeth Warren being able to go on and get her degree and educate herself that way and working really hard and getting good grades. So she got a good scholarship and didn't have to pay much for college. That's great. Good for you. But then she lies about it because she also has told the story in a different way, saying that, well, she had to face a lot of adversity in her life, and her parents couldn't afford to pay for college and all this other stuff. Well, which is it, Elizabeth Warren? Was it $50 to go, or did you come from an impoverished background where your parents couldn't afford to make college payments? It's got to be one or the other. And so that narrative just happens to change depending on what audience she is talking to and the point that she is trying to make in that exact moment. She lied about being fired for being pregnant. She told the story and told it in this election cycle that she was not pregnant, and then she got pregnant while she was teaching, and then when she was visibly pregnant, then they let her go and fired her and said that they would be more comfortable with somebody that wasn't pregnant. And then when you look into the records, it turns out that what actually happened is that Elizabeth Warren resigned. In fact, she was unanimously renewed by that school. The board unanimously decided to keep her on. She resigned her position herself. And that story is backed up by a recording of Elizabeth Warren telling that story where she explained that she resigned. So Elizabeth Warren is rebutting her own lies at this point. She also lied, and this is the big one. I know, it's coming. You saw it coming too. She lied about being Native American. And this is a lie that she is not just kind of, oh, it's an interesting thing that I told somebody. I told a reporter once that I think I might have some Native American in my background. No, it wasn't that. She actually not only lied about it to reporters, she also wrote a cookbook called Pow Wow Chow, which, by the way, they found out later she plagiarized. So she was lying about her Native American heritage, and then she lied about having written the cookbook in which she was lying about her Native American heritage. So there's lies now stacking on top of other lies. She also wrote she wrote Native American as her race on her Texas bar registration card. So the Texas Bar Association for Attorneys, her card actually reads Native American. Then she also billed herself as a Native American professor at Harvard. Harvard even advertised her as a woman of color on their staff. And then she took that 23andMe and turns out that she is one 1024th Native American at the absolute best. She's whiter than virtually everybody in the country. But that's what she came out with. And so she billed herself as this Native American professor at Harvard. For all that we could tell, that she actually used that as a talking point in her job interview. There's a good chance that she got the position that she did at Harvard specifically because she was of Native American descent. So she not only has a record of lying about her heritage, she also has been profiting off of it. Now remember that this is happening in a society that we have now in 2020, where teenage girls going to prom in what is perceived to be a Chinese dress, even though it actually kind of wasn't, but I'm not going to rehash that story again right now, that is worthy of our vitriol over cultural appropriation. But Elizabeth Warren can not just say that she's Native American, but actually lie to people about it and enrich herself off of culturally appropriating somebody else's race, and that one we're supposed to be okay with. Yeah, don't try to follow the logic trail because there's not one. My point in all of that is, though, it seems to be an inconsistency with the left standard on what is qualified as cultural appropriation. But Warren has been lying about that for years. And when you look at the left that makes absolutely everything about race, race is who you are, race is your identity. Every aspect of your life is affected by what race you are, which is bullcrap, and I've debunked that many times, and the fact that Martin Luther King's dream was actually a society that treated you based on the content of your character, not the color of your skin. But ignoring that for a second, that is what their side believes, that race is absolutely everything, that it colors everything that we do, and what's the most horrible thing that a white person can do is to culturally appropriate and benefit off of another person's race. And Elizabeth Warren has been doing this virtually her entire life. And they just ignore it. So you understand why I am less than sympathetic to the idea that Elizabeth Warren is some great truth teller and she will, as the Des Moines Register put it, treat the truth as though it is something that matters. If anything, Warren hasn't just been stretching the truth in her career, she's been using it as her own personal trampoline her entire career. Maybe the Des Moines Register should have thought about that. And the great irony in this is that Elizabeth Warren is so devoid of all self-reflection and self-awareness that she actually thinks of herself as a truth teller as well, and apparently has convinced her followers to believe the same. To understand this better, here's a clip of Elizabeth Warren talking about politicians and dishonesty.
Is it disqualifying for a presidential candidate to lie to the American public about anything?
I would think that how could the American people want someone who lies to them?
Elizabeth Warren with not an ounce of self-awareness at all. How could the American people even want somebody that would lie to them? For once, I agree with Elizabeth Warren. The American people should not want a person as president that lies to them. And that is why, if I had to pick out of anybody in the Democrat field, Elizabeth Warren, if that were my criteria, if I were going to be, who's going to tell me the truth? That's why Elizabeth Warren would be on the absolute bottom of my list, if that were the gauge I was going for. Look, all politicians lie. Sometimes they do it intentionally, sometimes they do it unintentionally, sometimes they lie by omitting information. It happens all the time, it's routine, we all understand that. But Warren lies without scruple or remorse, because she's done it for so long she doesn't even think of it as something to be remorseful for. It is her default setting. And because of that, she's gotten to the point to where she doesn't even see herself as a dishonest person, which may be the biggest lie Elizabeth Warren has ever told, lying to herself and thinking that she's honest. Let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
The Chaplain's Report today, I had a really great experience over this past weekend. My friends got me a really thoughtful Christmas present. There was a show that was going on in Huntsville, and that's actually the reason I didn't have a show yesterday, is because I was still coming back from Huntsville and didn't have time to get a show together. So I came back from this show in Huntsville where C.S. Lewis, an actor portraying C.S. Lewis, was sitting there on the stage and trying to have a conversation with the audience. So the whole shtick of the show is they try to make it like a conversation between you and C.S. Lewis if you went to visit him while he was still alive at his home in England. And it's a really fantastic show. It's one of the best gifts that I've ever received personally, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I really appreciate Chris and Allison for doing that for me. It was a great experience. And there were a lot of things that I learned from C.S. Lewis's life that it fits so well with his body of work. And if you've ever talked to me about theology or talked to me about my favorite authors or my books, C.S. Lewis is definitely my favorite author. It's really not even close. And so it really made me think of a passage, one in particular where he's talking about death and how he was preparing for it. Because remember that the play is supposed to take place not long before Lewis actually does die in 1963. And it really made me think of this Bible verse that happens in Hebrews 11. Now, to understand what is being talked about by the Hebrew author here, you have to understand that Hebrews is often referred to, at least chapter 11 is, as the Hall of Fame of Faith. So when you're watching the quote-unquote Hall of Fame of Faith in Hebrews 11, you get to the end of it, well, actually more like the middle, but you get to this part where after it's talked about these great spiritual leaders like Abraham and Moses, and then it gets to this part where it gives a little bit of commentary on it, where it says in Hebrews 11, 13 through 16, all these died in faith, without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on this earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Now, this is just an absolutely phenomenal passage of Scripture. And it's such a great summary of many Bible narratives kind of rolled into one. Because one thing that you'll notice is the way that it characterizes these great spiritual leaders is that they work towards a goal, but they never actually got to the goal. It was something that they saw in a distance, far off, somewhere that God was leading them that they couldn't quite see, they couldn't quite put their finger on, but they knew it was out there, and because they walked by faith and were obedient to God, they set out towards the city that they cannot yet see. And the way that it describes it, it really brings it into perspective, because virtually every hero in the Bible, he leaves unfinished work. Almost all of them. Very few of them actually accomplish the goal that God sets them on. I mean, there's countless examples of this. They just never seem to see the full fruition of what they were working toward. Moses does not enter the promised land with the children of Israel. He sees it from across the Jordan from a mountaintop, but he never actually leads them into the promised land or enters into it. He dies before he does so. You look at King David. King David had a burning desire, not only to see God's people thrive, but to worship God in his temple. And God tells him, David, that's not for you. You can prepare the way for that. You can make accommodations for someone else to do it, but ultimately your son's going to build it. That is not the task that I have for you. He saw it from afar off. He made preparations for it, but he never got to see the temple himself. And I could go through countless different examples of this, but I think probably the one that impacts us the most is Jesus Christ. Jesus came here to bring the kingdom to us, to save his people from their sins, and to create a holy nation, a priesthood that is redeemed by his blood. And when does he ascend to heaven? Before that happens. Directly before, in fact. The kingdom doesn't show up until the day of Pentecost. And so even Jesus, God in the flesh, left this earth before his work was finished. I think that really speaks to us because as human beings, and it's just human nature, and I do the same thing, we are constantly worried about finishing the goal, reaching the destination. And there's a lot of good to that. These men that we're talking about in Hebrews 11 did the same thing. But ultimately, we have to remember that our ultimate goal is not one we are going to reach in our lifetime. We are always going to leave unfinished work. We are always going to leave people behind. That's just the nature of being human. It was true of Moses and David and Jesus and John the Baptist and so many others. And it will be true of us one day as well. C.S. Lewis spoke on this matter in a letter to Mary Willis Shelburne on June 17, 1963. And this is what Lewis wrote. Pain is terrible, but surely you need not have fear as well. Can you not see death as a friend and deliverer? It means stripping off that body which is tormenting you, like taking off a hair, shirt, or getting out of a dungeon. What is there to be afraid of? You have long attempted, and none of us more so, a Christian life. Your sins are confessed and absolved. Has this world been so kind to you that you should leave it with regret? There are better things ahead than any we leave behind. Remember, though we struggle against things because we are afraid of them, it is often the other way around. We get afraid because we struggle. Are you struggling, resisting? Don't you think our Lord says to you, peace, child, peace, relax, let go. Underneath our everlasting arms. Let go, I will catch you. Do you trust me so little? Of course, this may not be the end. Then make it a good rehearsal, yours, and it like you a tired traveler near the journey's end, Jack. Now, this particular letter was penned in June of 1963, just a few weeks before he had his heart attack, and only 5 months before Lewis died. He understood that the end was coming, and you see that at the tail end of his letter in the way that he signs off, that he is also near his journey's end. You know, in reading that letter, you can detect the eagerness. And he said in his own personal writings that when he had his heart attack, there was even a little bit of anticipation. Almost like he was joyous that the end was on its way. But the Lord saw fit to keep him on earth for a few months longer, and then eventually he did pass and was able to go on. You see, like Abraham, Lewis understood that we are ultimately pilgrims. We don't belong here. This land is not made for us. This is not the place that God intends for us to live. God tells us to set out for a city that we cannot see, a destination that we don't know what it's actually like. He gives us some description, but ultimately we don't understand, and he never intended for us to understand every detail of what that home is going to be like. And that is why the world always treats us like outcasts, like outsiders, because we are. Living like Jesus does not grant you any kind of favor with the world. If anything, it puts you at odds with it. Just like it did with Jesus himself. And Lewis wrote this so beautifully in some of his fiction. In The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the very last scene, Reepicheep, one of the characters, who is a knight and has been a knight and a warrior virtually his entire life, he gets to the end, the shore, Aslan's country, the Narnian version of heaven. And before he sets off, he draws his blade and sets it in the sand and says, I guess I won't need this anymore. This is a concept Lewis understood. When heaven comes, you leave all that behind. The things that you needed, the things that defined you in this world, you don't need them anymore, most of them. Because you were a warrior and a pilgrim here on this earth, but that's not the way that it's going to be when we're in our true home, the home that has been designed for us, not built by human hands. There's another instance in the Chronicles of Narnia, the last battle, in the very last chapter, and I know I'm giving a spoiler here, but the book's like, I don't know, over 70 years old at this point, so I don't think that I need to issue a spoiler warning. In the last battle, the last place that they go to, Aslan's country, when all the characters wind up in the Narnian version of heaven again, they talk about all these things that remind them of what it was like to be alive, and then they realize, no, it's actually the other way around. We liked things here on this side of eternity, on this earth, because they reminded us of what the true home was supposed to be like. You go further up and further in, as Lewis writes. And the more you do, the more at home you are. It's like a layer where every layer that you go further into is actually larger and grander and better than the last. And that is why he wrote what he did about anticipating this future home with great eagerness. You see, the whole series is a series of struggles between these characters and the forces of darkness, all the hardship and pain that they went through, and winning some victories along the way, but ultimately it was a struggle the entire time. When they reach the last place, when they have left what he refers to as the Shadowland, the shadow of the former, in other words, the parts of the world that seem like heaven but ultimately fall short. Once we finally left that, we'll be truly at home, and we'll understand why we loved the things here as much as we did. Because that will be a land that we are designed for. When our journey has come to an end, when we are no longer pilgrims in a strange land, when we join the others as a citizen of heaven. That's where we truly belong. You see, ultimately, all of our lives are just jumping from one struggle to the next. Life is a constant struggle. And when we finish one, you can rest assured another one is coming up just around the corner. So many people live their lives trying to get comfortable and just kind of cruise along and get to what we refer to as the good life. There is no utopia east of Eden. The only way that we are ever going to have that communion with God and live in a place that was designed for us to live in our true home is on the other side of this life. And that's something that all these characters in Hebrews 11 understood. It's something that Lewis understood too. That's the life that we need to live. As straying pilgrims, not belonging here and understanding that what we are actually living for, what we're actually doing is preparing not for this life to be comfortable, but for the next. This life we labor and toil and struggle. It's not how it will be in the next life, because we are where we belonged all along. The place that we were actually made for, the place that God actually meant for us to be. Stay the course, friends. Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media or our business partners. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Video production by Jackson Dean. Broadcast studio provided by Faulkner University. Location studio provided by the Dalreda Church of Christ.